February 28, 1944. Debden Airfield, Essex, England. The morning frost crunched beneath the boots of Colonel Donald Blakeslee as he walked toward the sleek silver fighter that would change the course of World War II. For 3 years, the Luftwaffe had owned the skies over Germany. No Allied fighter possessed the range to escort bombers deep into the Reich and return home. But the aircraft sitting on the tarmac before him challenged that fundamental assumption of aerial warfare. The P-51B Mustang gleamed in the pale English sunlight, its Packard-built Merlin engine promising performance that seemed almost too good to be true. 4 days later, on March 4th, they escorted a force of B-17 and B-24s to Berlin. It was the first time single-engine fighters had made the 1,120-mile round trip to the German capital, 560 miles away. What German pilots would witness on that March morning would shatter their confidence in Luftwaffe invincibility and signal the beginning of the end for Hitler's Air Force. The mathematics of Allied victory would be written not in casualty reports, but in fuel calculations that proved American engineering had achieved the impossible. The crisis had been building since October 14, 1943, when the second Schweinfurt raid became known as Black Thursday. 60 B-17, flying fortresses failed to return from the bombing raid on Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories, while another 17 were damaged beyond repair. The Luftwaffe's fighters had waited beyond the 400-mile range limit of P-47 Thunderbolt escorts, then attacked the undefended bombers with devastating effectiveness. Despite formations flying in defensive combat boxes, unescorted bombers proved no match for coordinated German fighter attacks. The losses were unsustainable, forcing the 8th Air Force to suspend deep penetration missions until long-range escort fighters could be deployed. The German strategy was devastatingly effective yet simple. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings would escort bomber formations to their maximum range of approximately 400 to 475 miles from English bases, then turn for home when fuel reserves required their return. The Messerschmitt Bf-19s and Focke-Wulf 190S would be waiting in the undefended zones beyond escort range, ready to attack defenseless flying fortresses and liberators. It was aerial warfare dictated by fuel capacity and combat radius, where every mile deeper into Germany meant greater vulnerability for American bombers. The 354th Fighter Group had already broken new ground, becoming the first unit to receive P-51Bs in Europe in November 1943. Their pioneering missions included the first long-range escort to Kiel on December 13, 1943, with a combat radius of 490 miles, a record-breaking escort mission that demonstrated the P-51's revolutionary capabilities. By February 1944, these early missions had proven the Mustang's potential, but the 4th Fighter Group would take long-range escort to its ultimate test with the mission to Berlin itself. But deep in the factories of North American aviation in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, engineers had been quietly perfecting a solution that would revolutionize air warfare. The P-51 Mustang combined revolutionary laminar-flow wing technology with the license-built Packard version of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. According to official test reports, the rate of climb is good, and the high speed in level flight is exceptionally good at all altitudes, from sea level to 40,000 feet. The airplane is very maneuverable with good controllability at indicated speeds up to 400 miles per hour. Most crucially, it possessed the range to fly to Berlin and return with fuel remaining for combat. The Luftwaffe's Technical Intelligence Service had captured intact P-51s and subjected them to exhaustive analysis. They measured fuel tank capacity, calculated consumption rates, and performed slide rule arithmetic that should have revealed the aircraft's true capabilities. Yet the implications seemed so impossible that German commanders dismissed their own data. No single-engine fighter could possess the range to reach Berlin from English bases. The physics simply didn't allow it, or so they believed. Oberst Adolf Galland, Germany's most respected fighter tactician, later recalled the moment when reality collided with assumption. In his book, The First and the Last, Galland said that when the Mustangs appeared, the official position handed down was that there were no long-range daylight fighters over Germany. He and another general climbed into their FW-190s and went to have a look-see for themselves. The Mustangs found them, and the other general was shot down. The mathematical reality behind the P-51's revolutionary range lay in details that German intelligence had somehow overlooked. In performance tests, the P-51B reached 441 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. In addition, the extended range made possible by the use of drop tanks enabled the Merlin-powered Mustang to be introduced as a bomber escort with a combat radius of 750 miles using 275 US gallons two-piece, sheet metal stamped construction drop tanks. With the addition of an 85-gallon fuel tank behind the pilot's seat, the P-51 could fly further than many twin-engine aircraft. March 4, 1944 dawned cold and overcast across southern England. At Debden, the pilots of the 4th Fighter Group gathered for what would become the most significant briefing in the history of fighter aviation. As one pilot later recalled, "When we gathered for the usual briefing, we noticed the gigantic illuminated map of Europe. A 2.5-meter-long red tape led from our base in southern England to the Big B for Berlin." The target was 560 miles deep into the heart of Nazi Germany, further than any fighter had ever escorted bombers, and returned to tell the tale. Colonel Blakeslee's pilots had received their Mustangs only 4 days earlier, on February 28th. Some pilots took off with less than an hour's checkout in the new aircraft. They were flying into combat in machines so new that paint still chipped from the propeller spinners. The weight of history pressed down on them as surely as the oxygen masks on their faces. They were about to attempt something that every aviation expert had declared impossible. The mission plan called for unprecedented coordination between multiple fighter groups. According to the briefing, they would join up with the bombers deep inside hostile territory. The shorter-ranged P-47 Thunderbolts would accompany the bombers to their maximum fuel limit, then turn for home. Minutes later, the P-51s would arrive to escort the bombers during their attack on Berlin and on the way back, until other P-47s and P-38s groups could take over for the final leg home to England. It was a carefully orchestrated ballet of fuel consumption and timing, where every minute mattered and every gallon of gasoline had been calculated to the last drop. The formation that took off that morning represented the convergence of American industrial might and British technological innovation. The Packard-built Merlin engines roared with 1,490 horsepower, driving four-bladed Hamilton Standard propellers through the frigid air. Each Mustang carried 105 gallons of internal fuel plus two 75-gallon drop tanks, enough to sustain flight for over 6 hours. But it was the aircraft's aerodynamic efficiency that made the impossible possible. The laminar-flow wing design, developed by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, reduced drag by maintaining smooth airflow across the wing's surface. Unlike conventional fighters whose wings created turbulence, the P-51's wing sliced through the air with minimal resistance. Combined with an innovative cooling system that turned the necessary drag of the radiator into additional thrust through the Meredith effect, the Mustang achieved fuel efficiency that bordered on the miraculous. The technical specifications revealed the full magnitude of American engineering achievement. With its external fuel tanks, the P-51B possessed an operational range of over 1,600 miles, more than double that of earlier escort fighters. The aircraft's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, while its maximum speed of 441 miles per hour at 30,000 feet surpassed anything the Luftwaffe could field at high altitudes. Most importantly, It maintained these performance characteristics while carrying 6.50 caliber machine guns with 1,880 rounds of ammunition, providing devastating firepower against enemy aircraft. German radar stations across occupied Europe tracked the approaching American formations with growing anxiety. The bomber stream was massive, over 800 B-17 and B-24s heading directly for Berlin. But what alarmed German controllers was the fighter escort. Instead of turning back at the usual range limits established by previous P-47 and P-38 missions, these escorts kept coming, pressing deeper into German airspace than any single-engine fighter had ever penetrated. Radar operators checked and double-checked their equipment, unable to believe that American fighters could possibly sustain flight at such distances from their home bases. Hauptmann Erich Hartmann, Germany's leading ace with 352 victories, scrambled his Mi-109G from an airfield south of Berlin. As he climbed toward the bomber stream, he expected to find the familiar sight of unescorted heavy bombers, vulnerable and ripe for destruction. Instead, he found himself facing sleek silver fighters that should not have existed over German soil. The fuel capacity necessary to reach Berlin from England was beyond the capabilities of any single-engine fighter he knew. The combat that followed over Berlin shattered every assumption the Luftwaffe held about air warfare. The German fighter planes from the first attack against the bombers had gone over to free hunting now they had carried out their first orders. They were fully engaged in fending off the Mustang escort fighters, with whom they hadn't bargained at all. For the first time in the war, German pilots found themselves fighting for their lives over their own capital city against fighters that had flown 600 miles to meet them. The technical superiority of the P-51 became apparent within minutes of the first engagement. Kurt Bulligan, the third highest-scoring German fighter pilot of World War II's Western Front, with 112 confirmed victories, 3 against Mustangs, later stated, "We would outturn the P-51 and the other American fighters, with the Bf-109 or the FW-190. Their turn rate was about the same. The P-51 was faster than us, but our munitions and cannon were better." Despite this assessment, the psychological impact of facing long-range escorts over Berlin was devastating to German morale. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, received the initial reports of American fighters over Berlin with disbelief, then mounting horror. Later, during his post-war interrogation, Göring would admit, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The man who had once boasted that no enemy bomber would ever reach the German capital, declaring his name would be Meyer if they did, now faced the reality that American fighters were not only reaching Berlin, but doing so with fuel to spare for combat. The first mission to Berlin on March 4th was followed by another on March 6th, then March 8th and March 9th. 48 P-51Bs took off for each mission, representing the full combat strength of the group. Each successive mission drove home the terrible new reality facing the Luftwaffe. No target in Germany remained beyond the reach of American long-range escorts. The myth of an impregnable German homeland had been shattered by fuel calculations and advanced aerodynamics. On March 6th, over 800 US bombers, escorted by over 900 fighters, attacked Berlin in what became one of the war's most significant air battles. Though bomber losses were heavy, with 69 B-17 losses but 160 German aircraft destroyed, this mission achieved the Allies' strategic goal of forcing the Luftwaffe to commit its fighters where P-51s could engage and destroy them. The psychological impact on German pilots was devastating, as they realized that no target in the Reich remained safe from American attack, regardless of distance from Allied bases. The industrial capacity behind the P-51 program revealed the true scale of American war production. Number built, 15,586 total. These aircraft rolled off production lines in California and Texas at a rate that dwarfed anything Germany could achieve. While the Luftwaffe struggled to replace aircraft and pilots lost in combat, American factories delivered hundreds of new Mustangs every month, each one capable of escorting bombers to any target in the Reich. During Big Week, a coordinated bombing offensive from February 20th to 25th, 1944 that targeted German aircraft production facilities, Mustang pilots destroyed 17% of the Luftwaffe's experienced fighter pilots in air-to-air combat. The cream of German aviation, aces who had dominated European skies since 1940, found themselves outclassed by American pilots flying superior aircraft with unlimited fuel reserves and numerical superiority. General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, implemented new tactics that leveraged the P-51's capabilities. If fighter pilots were chasing an enemy fighter and went through 18,000 feet, they were to break off the attack and return to close escort. Now they were ordered to pursue and destroy the enemy. That is when the victories started to soar. The Mustangs were unleashed to hunt German fighters wherever they could be found, turning the hunter into the hunted across the breadth of occupied Europe. The transformation of the air war was measured not only in aircraft destroyed, but in missions completed. The crippling losses which the US bombers had previously suffered were thereafter drastically reduced. In October 1943, as many as 9.1% of the 8th Air Force bomber sorties credited with attacking their targets had failed to return, and a further 45.6% had been damaged. In February 1944, the corresponding figures fell to 3.5% and 29.9%. German fighter pilots, once confident in their ability to intercept unescorted bombers, now faced a nightmare scenario. American fighters appeared everywhere, at any altitude, over any target. There was no safe place where German aircraft could fly without being attacked. The Mustang even flew mission to Poland, Czechoslovakia, and shuttle missions to Russia with the bombers. The Luftwaffe's defensive strategy, based on waiting for escorts to turn back, had been rendered obsolete by American engineering and mass production. The P-51's impact extended beyond technical superiority to represent the triumph of American industrial organization over German military tradition. While the Luftwaffe relied on individual aces and superior training to overcome material disadvantages, America mass-produced both excellent aircraft and competent pilots. The Germans possessed adequate aircraft numbers right up to the war's end, but Allied fighters killed so many experienced German pilots that squadrons lacked qualified air crews to fill cockpits. By D-Day on June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe had been effectively neutralized as a strategic threat. Historians agree that spring 1944 marked the breaking of the Luftwaffe's back and the achievement of Allied air superiority. Only 2 enemy aircraft responded to the Normandy invasion, demonstrating how completely the transformation had occurred. Allied ground forces landed on French beaches without facing significant air opposition for the first time in the war. The 8th Air Force's commitment to the P-51 reflected its devastating effectiveness. From December 1943, the P-51 overtook both the P-38 and P-47, and by year's end equipped all but one of the 8th Air Force's fighter groups. Only the 56th Fighter Group retained their P-47 Thunderbolts, more from pride in their combat record than from any technical superiority. The versatility of the P-51 extended far beyond escort missions. Hard points below each wing allowed the P-51D to be fitted with 500-pound bombs or 3-shot 4.5-inch rocket launchers, bolstering its capabilities as a close air support platform. Mustangs strafed German airfields, destroyed locomotives, and interdicted supply lines deep behind enemy territory. No aspect of German military logistics was safe from attack. The technological advantages that made the P-51 Supreme were not accidental, but the result of deliberate American engineering excellence. The Packard-built Merlin engine provided 1,490 horsepower at normal power settings, with war emergency power boosting output to 1,720 horsepower. This power, combined with the aircraft's revolutionary laminar-flow wing and efficient cooling system, provided performance that German fighters simply could not match at the altitudes where combat occurred. The introduction of advanced fire control systems further amplified the P-51's lethality. The K-14 gyroscopic gun sight, introduced in late 1944, automatically computed lead angles and range, dramatically improving gunnery accuracy. This technological edge, combined with the superior training of American pilots, created an overwhelming advantage in air-to-air combat. German pilots, even experienced aces, found themselves consistently outgunned and outmaneuvered by American aviators flying technically superior aircraft. The industrial mobilization required to produce over 15,586 P-51 Mustangs demonstrated American economic resilience and organizational capability. From initial design to final delivery, the program showcased the efficiency of American mass production techniques. The coordination between North American aviation, Packard Motors, and hundreds of subcontractors created supply chains of unprecedented complexity and reliability. Quality control systems ensured that each aircraft met exacting specifications, while continuous improvement programs incorporated lessons learned from combat experience. The human cost of the Mustang's success fell heavily on the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots. Men like Hauptmann Erich Hartmann and Major Gerhard Barkhorn, who had dominated Eastern Front skies, found themselves increasingly isolated as their squadrons were decimated by American escorts. The loss of veteran pilots created a cascade of degradation in German fighter effectiveness that no amount of new aircraft could repair. American pilot training programs produced competent fighter pilots to fly the new Mustangs. Unlike the Luftwaffe, which progressively shortened training programs as fuel shortages worsened, American flight schools maintained rigorous standards. Colonel Clarence "Bud" Anderson exemplified this training effectiveness, serving 2 combat tours escorting heavy bombers from November 1943 through January 1945. He flew 116 combat missions totaling 480 hours and destroyed 16.25 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, plus another on the ground, entering combat well prepared and confident in superior equipment. The P-51's impact on bombing accuracy proved as significant as its effect on bomber survival rates. With reliable fighter escort all the way to targets, bomber formations maintained tight formations and executed precision attacks. German industrial targets, previously protected by distance and fighter interception, now faced systematic destruction. Synthetic oil plants, aircraft factories, and transportation hubs sustaining the German war effort came under relentless assault. Intelligence reports from captured German pilots revealed the depth of demoralization caused by long-range escorts. Men who had fought confidently against shorter-ranged P-47s and P-38s found themselves psychologically defeated by aircraft that appeared from nowhere with unlimited endurance. The knowledge that no German target remained beyond American reach sapped the will to resist among even the most dedicated Nazi pilots. The industrial statistics behind P-51 production revealed American war manufacturing capabilities. At peak production, North American aviation delivered nearly 100 Mustangs per week from their 2 assembly plants. German aircraft production, handicapped by bombing attacks and material shortages, could not replace losses at anything approaching this rate. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored the side with inexhaustible production capacity. Technical modifications to the P-51 continued throughout the war, improving performance with each production block. The bubble canopy on the P-51D provided pilots with unobstructed vision in all directions. The K-14 gyroscopic gun sight increased gunnery accuracy dramatically. Each improvement widened the performance gap between American and German fighters. By late 1944, experienced Luftwaffe pilots spoke openly of their impossible situation. They faced American fighters that were faster, longer-ranged, and present in overwhelming numbers. German aircraft production, despite heroic efforts, could not match American output. Pilot training programs had been abbreviated to the point where new German aviators entered combat with minimal preparation against battle-hardened American veterans. The strategic bombing campaign that the P-51 enabled accelerated German resistance collapse on all fronts. Fuel shortages from attacks on synthetic oil plants grounded much of the remaining Luftwaffe. Transportation disruption isolated German armies and prevented reinforcement of threatened sectors. Industrial production declined as key factories were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The final months of the European War saw P-51s ranging across Germany virtually unopposed. By May 8, 1945, the 8th, 9th and 15th Air Force's P-51 groups claimed some 4,950 aircraft shot down, about half of all USAF claims in the European theatre, the most claimed by any Allied fighter in air-to-air combat, and 4,131 destroyed on the ground. Losses were about 2,520 aircraft. These statistics represent one of the most lopsided victories in the history of air warfare. The human stories behind these statistics reveal the personal cost of aerial combat. American pilots like Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson flew mission after mission into German airspace, knowing that each flight might be their last. Anderson later recalled, "My average combat mission was about 4.5 hours in duration, the longest mission flown on D-Day when I logged 6 hours and 55 minutes. I still had enough fuel in reserve for about another hour." The endurance required for such missions tested pilots' physical and mental limits while demonstrating the P-51's remarkable fuel efficiency. German pilots faced an even grimmer reality. They flew outdated aircraft with inadequate fuel against overwhelming numbers of superior American fighters. Many German aces who had survived years of combat on the Eastern Front fell to American Mustangs in the skies over their homeland. The transfer of experienced pilots from other fronts could not compensate for the fundamental disadvantages in equipment and numbers. The broader strategic implications of P-51 superiority extended beyond the air war itself. Air supremacy enabled the success of Operation Overlord and subsequent ground operations in Western Europe. German ground forces, accustomed to friendly air cover, found themselves exposed to constant air attack. Supply convoys, troop movements, and defensive preparations all came under aerial observation and attack. The technological lessons learned from P-51 development influenced post-war aircraft design across the world. The combination of laminar-flow wing technology, efficient cooling systems, and powerful engines became standard practice for high-performance aircraft. The emphasis on range and endurance, driven by wartime escort requirements, shaped fighter development for decades to come. The economic impact of P-51 production demonstrated American industrial capabilities that would define the post-war world order. The ability to design, produce, and deploy thousands of advanced aircraft while simultaneously supporting ground forces and naval operations revealed a depth of industrial capacity that no other nation could match. This demonstration of American power influenced post-war political arrangements and alliance structures. The scientific and engineering achievements represented by the P-51 program went far beyond aeronautics. Advanced metallurgy, precision manufacturing, quality control systems, and logistical coordination all reached new levels of sophistication. These capabilities would prove crucial in post-war reconstruction efforts and the emerging Cold War competition with the Soviet Union. Individual combat reports from P-51 pilots reveal the tactical superiority that translated strategic advantage into battlefield victory. American pilots consistently reported engaging German fighters at altitudes and ranges where the Mustangs' performance advantages were most pronounced. The ability to choose when and where to fight, enabled by superior speed and climb rate, gave American pilots decisive advantages in air-to-air combat. The maintenance and reliability advantages of the P-51 over German fighters became increasingly important as the war progressed. While German aircraft required extensive maintenance and scarce replacement parts, Mustangs operated with remarkable reliability. American ground crews, supported by comprehensive training programs and abundant spare parts, kept aircraft operational at rates that German maintenance organizations could not match. The intelligence-gathering capabilities enabled by P-51 escort missions provided Allied commanders with unprecedented insight into German defensive preparations and troop movements. Photo reconnaissance variants of the Mustang, designated F-6, operated deep behind enemy lines with impunity. The intelligence gathered by these missions supported ground operations and strategic planning throughout the final year of the war. Weather reconnaissance flights by specially equipped P-51s provided crucial meteorological data for bombing missions and ground operations. The ability to gather weather information over enemy territory enabled more accurate mission planning and reduced the number of aborted sorties due to unexpected weather conditions. The training and doctrine development that accompanied P-51 deployment created a generation of American fighter pilots whose skills would influence air combat for decades. The tactics developed for long-range escort missions, fighter sweeps, and ground attack operations became the foundation for post-war fighter doctrine. Many P-51 veterans would later serve as instructors and leaders during the Korean War and beyond. The industrial mobilization required to produce over 15,000 P-51 Mustangs demonstrated American economic resilience and organizational capability. From initial design to final delivery, the program showcased the efficiency of American mass production techniques. The coordination between North American aviation, Packard Motors, and hundreds of subcontractors created supply chains of unprecedented complexity and reliability. The international cooperation between American and British engineers that produced the Merlin-powered Mustang foreshadowed post-war technological partnerships. The successful integration of British engine technology with American airframe design proved that Allied cooperation could produce results superior to what either nation could achieve independently. The obsolescence of pre-war air defense concepts became apparent with the appearance of P-51s over previously secure German targets. Fighter interception strategies based on limited-range escorts proved worthless against aircraft capable of flying from England to Poland. Anti-aircraft defenses designed to protect against unescorted bombers found themselves overwhelmed by formations with unlimited fighter protection. The morale impact of P-51 operations extended beyond military targets to German civilian populations. The sight of American fighters over German cities in broad daylight demonstrated that Nazi promises of invulnerability were hollow. This psychological effect accelerated the collapse of home front morale and contributed to the German surrender in May 1945. The legacy of the P-51 Mustang extends far beyond its wartime achievements to its influence on post-war aviation development. The aircraft served with distinction in the Korean War, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, and numerous other conflicts well into the 1980s. Its fundamental design principles influenced jet fighter development and established performance standards that would define air superiority for generations. The story of the P-51 Mustang's domination of German skies represents the triumph of American industrial organization, scientific innovation, and strategic vision over German military tradition and tactical excellence. The mathematics of fuel consumption and aerodynamic efficiency, translated into operational capability, achieved what years of ground warfare could not accomplish: the complete neutralization of German air power. From the first tentative missions over northern France to the final combat sorties over Berlin, the P-51 Mustang transformed the strategic situation in Europe. It enabled precision bombing of German industrial targets, protected Allied ground forces from air attack, and demonstrated American technological superiority to both enemies and allies. The silver fighters that Hermann Göring saw over Berlin represented not just aircraft, but the industrial might of a democracy fully mobilized for war. The men who flew these missions understood that they were making history with every sortie into German airspace. They carried with them not only bombs and bullets, but the hopes of free nations and the promise of liberation for occupied Europe. Their success in the cockpits of P-51 Mustangs helped ensure that democracy would survive its greatest test and emerge victorious from the crucible of global war. The P-51 Mustang had achieved what German leaders thought impossible. It had made every target in Nazi Germany vulnerable to Allied attack. In doing so, it hastened the end of the war and saved countless lives on both sides. The transformation from defensive desperation to offensive dominance, accomplished by American engineering and manufacturing excellence, stands as one of the decisive technological achievements of the Second World War. When the last P-51 escort mission ended with the German surrender in May 1945, it marked not just the end of a war, but the beginning of an era in which American air power would help maintain peace and stability across the globe. The lessons learned in the skies over Europe, written in the contrails of silver Mustangs, would guide aviation development and strategic thinking for decades to come. The fighter that had carried bombers to Berlin had also carried the hopes of free peoples to ultimate victory.